Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizenghausen. January 2nd, today's episode will be very eventful with lots of interesting news. So, in this episode, the Kremlin is preparing a large-scale terrorist attack to disrupt peace talks with the US. This was reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the US State Department is urging its citizens to urgently leave the Russian Federation. Also in this episode, we'll talk about how Russian special services forged data from a Ukrainian drone to once again deceive Donald Trump. And we'll also discuss the strikes on Russian oil refineries. Propagandists from Russia Today told a wild story about a Russian Marine who rammed a tank with his head. There are some very interesting details. And also about the very strange congratulatory message for Putin recorded by Kim Jong Un. You have to hear this. Protests in Iran, a real hunger riot has broken out there. People are burning portraits of the ayatollahs. What's the reason and what could this lead to? And Trump has already threatened US intervention. In the Moscow region, they're preparing a house for yet another dictator. What's going on? This and more in today's episode. There will be a lot of interesting things. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So the Kremlin is preparing a large-scale provocation with human casualties. This is reported by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service. Against this backdrop, the State Department has issued a message to US citizens urging them to urgently leave the territory of the Russian Federation. And so the Foreign Intelligence Service reports that Russia's goal is to disrupt peace negotiations mediated by the United States. The likely time when this terrorist attack could occur is on the eve of or during Christmas. And let me remind you that in Russia, Christmas is celebrated on January 7th. And the target could be a religious building or another symbolic site in Russia, or in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, according to the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service. So, the logic here is very simple. They failed to disrupt the negotiations. With lies about an attack on Putin's residence, they will resort to their favorite method, a terrorist attack. And as cynical as it may sound, carrying out a terrorist attack on Russian territory is much easier than faking an attack. On Putin's residence, trying to fool American satellites and American intelligence. But most importantly, they've already done this in Russia more than once. Let me just remind you that Putin came to power precisely through such terrorist attacks. Remember that infamous Ryazan sugar incident? Back in 1999, a wave of terrorist attacks swept across Russia. The FSB blew up apartment buildings with Russian citizens inside in Moscow. In Buynaksk and Volgodonsk, about 300 people were killed at that time, including children. The explosions happened at night. It was extremely cynical as families were sleeping in their homes. This was necessary to justify the war in Chechnya and to bring Putin to power, which is exactly what happened later. At that time, the FSB was headed by Patrushev, who is still close to Putin. So Putin is no stranger to blowing up his own citizens. Well, if he has already destroyed more than 1 million of his own citizens in this war, then for him, a few dozen or even a few hundred Russians are just dust. By the way, for those who want to revisit this topic, or maybe for those who don't know about the Ryazan sugar incident, you can find information on YouTube. There's an excellent film that exposes how the FSB was blowing up Russia back then. That's exactly what it's called. The FSB blows up Russia. And yet, even though the CIA has already stated that there was no attack on Putin's residence, Russia still insists that there was a massive attack on Putin's residence. And look at what they're doing. They handed over materials with routing data from the controller of the Ukrainian drone, which was allegedly shot down by Russian air defense. On the night of December 29th, they gave it to a representative, specifically to the military attaché at the US Embassy in Moscow. This was reported by the Ministry of Defense. In other words, they handed over a completely intact, undamaged controller supposedly from a Ukrainian drone. And if you extract the data from it, you can see that the route would have led the drone directly to Putin's residence if it hadn't been shot down. The Russians stubbornly keep digging themselves deeper into their own lies, even after the CIA has already dotted all the I's. But why are they doing this? Lie to the very end, as they say. The thing is, Putin's reputation in the eyes of Trump himself is what's at stake here. Putin can lie to anyone he wants, but not to Trump, at least according to Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is perfectly fine with lying to achieve a goal, but not lying to his face. And so stupid that it can be verified. And here Putin personally lied to Trump. They talked on the phone, and Putin told how terrible Ukraine launched drones where Putin's family lives in Valdai. Oh. It turned out all of this was complete nonsense, a lie. It's one thing when the dim-witted Nebenzia speaks from the UN Security Council podium, telling stories about biolabs with combat mosquitoes at the UN. But here the underground commander himself lied directly to Donald Trump. Donald Trump does not forgive that. And by the way, the Russian special services rushed to do damage control. The reputation of the Botox Medusa, well, look at what they did. They handed over this controller, and then the technical specialists gave their answer. Is it even possible to fake this controller or its root? Of course it is. Any competent engineer can do it in a few hours. First of all, this routing data, every drone has a flight controller like this. Let's call it the brains. It writes logs, log files to internal memory, flash memory, or to an SD card. And there it records GPS coordinates, altitude, speed, and where the drone is flying. How can this be faked? There's a very simple, let's say, student method. A log file is just a set of numbers. You take the controller from any downed Ukrainian drone, whether from Belgorod or anywhere else. You connect it to a computer and download the log. You open this log in an editor and simply change the coordinates. Instead of the coordinates of the Donetsk region where it was flying, you enter the coordinates of Valdai. You upload it back, and that's it for the inspection. The only thing is, to check the hash sums, you need a bit more expertise, but believe me, the GRU has it. There's also a laboratory method. I think that's what the Russians did. It's more reliable. In other words, they take the controller, connect it to a GPS simulator, and the drone is lying somewhere on a table, let's say at Lubyanka in Moscow, but its brain thinks it's flying over Valdai. So you launch the flight program, the controller records it, thinking it's the real track, believing it's in flight when in reality it's just a simulation. As a result, you end up with a clean file containing the route to Putin's residence. That's all there is to it. So this controller that was ceremoniously handed over to the American side only proves one thing, that Russia has a controller with certain numbers recorded on it, but it doesn't prove that the drone was physically there. By the way, where are the other 90 controllers? They said that 91 drones were flying toward Putin's residence. And just one more thing, the reason why the CIA will laugh so much at this particular controller. The thing is, the US relied on data from the Central Intelligence Agency. And they relied on data from the infrared satellite and radar systems. In other words, the satellite detects heat. It sees the heat trail of drone engines. It sees explosions in real time. And you can't fool a satellite by just showing it this flash drive. So if the satellite didn't see 91, the road, the heat flashes, the whole barrage of Pantsir systems firing at them, if the satellite didn't see any of that, then no little box with wires will prove anything. And as for the Russians, their main mistake is that they got so carried away with creating a fake that they forgot the main rule of a liar, which they themselves have used so many times. Lie on a grand scale, but don't touch the details. Hide the details. They showed a detail and it destroyed this grand lie. Now just wait, the experts will analyze this controller and give their opinion. And the most important question, which is probably even bigger, is addressed to the Russians. Why do the Russians have to prove something to the US? Why do the Russians have to prove something to a NATO country, to the founder of NATO? According to Russian propaganda, they've been at war with NATO since 2022, if not earlier. So why hand something over to the American attaché, especially microchips from drones? It turns out that NATO is not Russia's enemy, and Putin is asking NATO for protection. Something doesn't add up here. Putin is complaining to Trump about Ukraine. Something doesn't add up here. Russians, I know that you sometimes manage to get around the bans and show up in these comments, and there are Putin supporters here too. What about, do you have your own version? Write it down. It'll be very interesting. We'll all have a good laugh. And let me remind you that in every episode we collect donations for the armed forces of Ukraine for different units. This is the most important part of our work. And this time we're raising funds for 2 vampire hexacopters. These are giant drones, also known as Baba Yaga, for the 101st Brigade, which is heroically defending the Donetsk direction. We've known the 101st Brigade and their commanders for a long time. They're incredible people, real titans, tough guys. So let's help them out. They really need these vampires right now. And as for the Russians, they run from these vampires like the devil from holy water. They call the hexacopter either vampire or Baba Yaga. It's truly massive. Its wingspan is much greater than a person's arm span, maybe even 1.5 times bigger. It's a serious piece of machinery. And why do they call it Baba Yaga? Because when this drone attacks at night, it's pure horror and terror. It's like the heavy artillery of the sky. In the hands of the professionals from the 101st Brigade, it's a terrifying weapon for the Russians. By the way, the soldiers from the 101st Brigade recorded a message for you. Please take a look at it.
Ми, бійці 101-ї окремої бригади охорони Генерального штабу, звертаємось до Бориса Тізенгаузена та його аудиторії. Воїни нашої бригади щодня виконують складні бойові завдання на Донецькому та Харківському напрямку. Просимо вашої підтримки у зборі на дрони «Вампір», антени та батареї для наших бойових підрозділів на лінії бойового зіткнення, що дозволить з вашою допомогою продовжити нищити ворога. Слава Україні!
Let's help our warriors. This is a contribution to the defense of Ukraine and a huge expression of gratitude. I always express my gratitude to everyone who helps Ukraine and supports our military, from the hundreds and hundreds of our defenders whom we have already helped. And you are simply incredible. Yesterday we completed the fundraiser for the legendary 24th Adar Assault Battalion. And now let's help our 101st Brigade. Wow, they're really going to stir things up over there. They'll give the Russians a hard time. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There's Mono, Privat, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. Well, if you don't see the payment details under the video, there's always a QR code. That also leads to the fundraiser. And now, let's talk about the burning Russian oil refinery. The year is starting off hot and bright for the Russians. Last night, Ukrainian strike drones attacked an oil refinery in the Samara region of Russia, over 900 kilometers away. They flew all that way to hit one of Rosneft's key assets. We're talking about the Novokuybishevsk oil refinery, which is part of the structure of that very same Rosneft. This is already the second oil refinery to be attacked since the beginning of the year. In other words, the armed forces of Ukraine have set a pace of at least 1 refinery per day. By the way, yesterday they also burned down 2 more oil depots. At this rate, Putin himself will soon have to carry oil to the ports by the bucketful. Hauling oil to the ports, and local residents report explosions, fire, business as usual. And this plant is an important target. And why is this so painful for the Kremlin? Why this particular plant? The thing is, it is one of the main producers of aviation kerosene and jet engine fuel. So it's a kind of rear hub where fuel for aircraft is produced, including for strategic aviation. Not far from there is the Engels airfield in the neighboring Saratov region. That's exactly where the Tu-95 and Tu-160 take off from, the ones that bomb Ukraine. So a strike on kerosene production is like clipping the wings of Russian aviation. It's a powerful plant processing about 8 million tons of oil per year. Shutting down such a giant even for a month creates a hole in Rosneft's budget amounting to hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And now this is important. Hitting the plant itself is good, but when they're linked together, a domino effect could happen in the region. There are 3 key oil refineries in the Samara region, the Kuybyshev, Novokuybyshev, and Syzran refineries. Ukraine is methodically taking out all these plants one by one. Just a week ago, they struck the Syzran refinery. If all 3 are put out of commission, the Volga region will experience a fuel paralysis. Well, it would be better if the paralysis hit the Kremlin. The Baldy already has it, but a fuel paralysis isn't bad either. By the way, for the fans of the Russian world who occasionally show up here in the comments, any criticism of Putin sends them into a wild hysteria. Yes, how dare you? To say such things about Putin, holy man, damn you. I dare. I'd rather have you as Putin's followers. This question was answered. Why does your withered macho man dye his eyebrows? I've injected myself with so much brown mascara and Botox that my eyes are no longer visible. I actually watched a bit of his New Year's speech. I won't show it to you here. Someone might be eating right now, and I don't want to ruin your appetite. But seriously, for those who remember, it's like that Fantomas from the Mesozoic era, right? I need a corpse, I chose you, see you soon, Fantomas, a real Fantomas. It's like he's been pulled into some kind of mask. Why did he inject himself with all that Botox? Really, why? That's not at all traditional or in line with our values. Russians, a lot of you, I'm asking you a lot of questions today. This is the last one there. A shocking piece of news came today for rural Russia and really for the whole country. Vodka prices will jump by 15% in 2025. This was reported by Leonov, the deputy head of the Russian trade union. What's going on? This is okay. Oil prices, Russians don't care about that at all, but vodka up by 15%. You'd better let alcohol gnome Medvedev handle this. He'll really show you what happens for such initiatives. Are you messing with something sacred? What are you doing? By the way, can this be considered a blow to the decision-making center? And I also wanted to ask, raising vodka prices in Russia, can that be considered genocide against Russians or not quite yet? And by the way, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Here, we don't just fight against Russian propaganda, the kind Putin spends astronomical amounts of money on, but we also show that both Russia and Putin, they're really not that great at all. And that's the most unpleasant thing for them. So make sure to subscribe. Yeah, what is there to talk about? Here we are talking about the lies of the Russian Foreign Ministry and the Russian Ministry of Defense. What is there to say when Russia Today puts out news like this? Every day? Today I came across a screenshot somewhere, I checked, and yes, this news is actually on Russia Today. A Russian Marine told a story about how, in a UAZ vehicle, a car, he rammed into a Ukrainian armed forces tank with the UAZ and won. Well, wow. So there are some interesting details there. A Russian Marine with the call sign Frenchman said that he saw a tank and rushed at it. By the way, what's with the call sign Frenchman? That's not a very traditional call sign at all. Putislav Dobrynya, now those are traditional. What's with Frenchman? So this Marine, here's the story, really. He worked in an evacuation group driving a UAZ with wounded soldiers. According to him, at night in Donbass it was so dark that the night vision device didn't work properly through the windshield. Well, really, night vision doesn't work at night. At some point, their group in the UAZ ran into a Ukrainian tank. Seeing the enemy vehicle and hearing the whistle of an incoming shell, the Marine decided to ram it. So they drove straight at it. The last thing he managed to think was, "Mom, forgive me," said the Marine. After the collision, this is where the amazing story begins. After the UAZ collided with the tank, the UAZ caught fire, the flames spread to the tank, and some Russian combat vehicles noticed this, drove up, and destroyed the tank. That is, the Marine was thrown through the windshield and spent several days in a coma. An incredible story. Why didn't they push it further? Why didn't they finish the script? So there were no BTRs or BMPs at all. The Marine flew through the windshield, smashed his head into the tank, and destroyed it. There you go, you see. That's how the story should have ended. They have a huge number of stories like this in Russia. They've already outdone Soviet propaganda in every way. And yesterday, by the way, I talked about the New Year's greetings from Lukashenko and Putin, but I forgot to tell you about one of the cringiest New Year's greetings. A greeting from Kim Jong Un. Get ready. An invincible alliance with Russia, proclaimed North Korean leader Kim Jong Un in his New Year's address. He specifically mentioned the participants in the military actions in Russia. Thanks to your selfless and devoted struggle, the fighting brotherly bond, friendship, and invincible alliance between our country and Russia are becoming even stronger. Mama's Little Nuclear Pie was made for the new year, a concert for the entire Politburo. And his greeting, I probably read only 100th of it. It's a gigantic greeting with very important wording. Just look at this. Kim Jong-un's greeting was covered by the Korean Central News Agency, and I'll give you one paragraph. I'll read you one. There are several dozen of them. When Comrade Kim Jong-un stepped up to the podium to the welcome march, all the audience and performers paid him boundless respect and eternal glory. To our Marshal, the outstanding leader of the UK Revolution, and the merciful father of the people, who, by turning our socialist state into a flowerbed of eternal happiness for the people, is opening the future of a nation that will forever remain bright. from generation to generation. Kim Jong Un has created a flower bed of eternal happiness. Well, the main thing is that he doesn't do anything else to that flower bed. The performers, through cheerful songs and dances, depicted the reality of a people's country where an independent life and true happiness are guaranteed, and the true image of a mighty Korea. Yes, in North Korea, an independent life is guaranteed. That's important to emphasize, of course. Well, and one of the key global topics right now, I think, is the protests in Iran. Very interesting events are happening there, which could also affect the Russian Federation. I think you've heard that quite large-scale protests have broken out there now. And this just proves that regimes which prioritize weapons production and the export of terrorism can end badly sooner or later. By the way, that's a note for the ball paper rat. If our Western partners had been more confident and tougher, I think Putin would have long since been living somewhere in a Chinese province. Just like Yanukovych and Assad are living there now. What's happening in Iran? Let's put it simply. So mass protests have erupted, but their nature is different. In 2022, there was a protest under the slogan, "Woman Life Freedom." Now, the reason is very banal and probably simple. People simply have nothing to live on and nothing to eat. The Iranian economy has simply collapsed into an abyss. The exchange rate. The Iranian rial has fallen to a historic low. Just think about it. Almost one and a half million rials are given for $1. Insane inflation is skyrocketing out of control. Basic food products have simply become unaffordable for a huge number of families. Add to this a severe water supply crisis in Tehran, the capital of Iran. Well, in general, the Ayatollah regime has managed things to the point where there's a crisis everywhere, simply put. But there's always enough money for the nuclear program. And to finance proxy terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, there's enough for that too. Of course there is. And here, it's hard not to draw a parallel. A parallel with the Putin regime, which also left Donbass without water for 12 years. Back then, they managed things so that in 12 years the region simply turned into a foul cesspool. Water is supplied only once every few days. There you have it. Well, who's going to care about the population? Come on, please. These are dictators after all. And a wave swept across the country. Shops are closing, people are striking. The main core of those striking are the merchants. Clashes with law enforcement are starting. The authorities have already opened fire on the protesters. Students have joined the merchants. And the main difference here is that this group of merchants who used to trade was probably one of the key pillars of the regime. And they were loyal to the authorities. But now they're saying, well, what are we supposed to do? We can't survive. Our families can't survive. You've managed things to this point. And what do they get in response? The Ayatollah's regime, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, responds by opening fire and gassing them with tear gas. Plus, there are also rumors that the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's health is not very good. That he is already possibly selecting possible successors for himself, and in fact, the struggle for inheritance has already begun. Of course, Israel and the US immediately got involved. There is a threat that another war with Iran could start, right? I mean, there is a threat that another war could break out, and the summer war essentially showed that Iran is very vulnerable technologically, and the strikes on nuclear facilities were, after all, successful. And the elimination of the generals of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps undermined the myth of their omnipotence, of this very corps. And this is a perfect storm, with several such disasters coming together at once. The tough UN sanctions, which were reinstated this fall. This past year, there was an environmental crisis, a water shortage, especially in the capital, military humiliation by Israel and the US, and of course, economic collapse. It was the economic collapse that became the trigger. Therefore, for the first time in a long while, the regime faced a hunger riot, including among some of its own supporters. So the risk of war is very high, especially right now, at the beginning of this year. Well, these aren't protests for freedom. This is simply an uprising against poverty, humiliation, and the virtual collapse of the state. And it's precisely these kinds of riots that are always the most deadly for regimes. Trump has already made a statement. He declared that if Iran opens fire and kills protesters, the US will come to their aid. We are fully armed and ready to act, Donald Trump stated. In fact, Iran has already opened fire, and now reports are coming in of 7 casualties who died in shootouts with the police. In Tehran, protesters are already burning posters with images of Ayatollah Khamenei. Well, are we waiting for the Ayatollah in Rostov? I wonder how quickly he'll get to Russia. Who will be faster? So let's put it this way. Who will flee to Russia faster? The Ayatollah or Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela? I think they might even start off in sync, both heading toward Russia. Even in a totalitarian Islamist state, people have found the will to take to the streets in fierce protest. And here's an important point. In the past 48 hours, 5 Russian Il-76 cargo planes have landed in Tehran. This points to a sharp increase in Russian cargo shipments to Iran. What are they sending over there? Are they delivering baklava? What are they delivering? Of course, weapons. Of course, weapons. They've sent their own instructors. Some of the flights were operated by the Belarusian airline Rubistar. According to journalistic investigations, planes from this airline have already been involved in scandals over arms deliveries to Syria. One of this company's planes was shot down in Mali, and it was transporting weapons for the Wagner PMC. So what were they transporting this time? Isn't that interesting? Against this backdrop, Israel decided not to miss its chance, and Hezbollah received warnings from Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar that this is their last chance to disarm. Otherwise, the Israeli army will take care of the disarmament. And finally, I thought for sure he had already been dealt with somewhere. I'm talking about Putin's crony Medvedchuk, but he keeps popping up like a jack-in-the-box. And look, here he is again. Former Ukrainian politician and Putin's crony Medvedchuk, let me remind you, whom Ukraine exchanged for its heroes. Putin popped up and called Ukraine a terrorist state, declaring that Ukraine has no right to exist. Do you see this crap? Just sit there and keep quiet, you miserable fool. It's strange that Putin hasn't just gotten rid of him yet. After all, it was Medvedchuk who was responsible for preparing for the Russian invasion from within Ukraine. Simply put, he was the one responsible for making sure the Russians would be greeted with flowers. The whole world knows very well how the Russians were actually received here. Although scum like Medvedchuk is extremely useful to Putin's regime, sometimes he bribes politicians in Europe, sometimes he makes idiotic statements, but in reality, in Europe, he did a good deed for the entire civilized world. By bribing European politicians, he exposed this network of corrupt, unscrupulous politicians who are willing to work for Russia for money. And now investigations are underway there. I hope everyone involved will be put behind bars. As for Medvedchuk, I have a feeling the Ukrainian Mossad will get to him. Oh, I really have that feeling. Well, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel. And let's help the 101st Brigade. Let's raise money for them to get vampires, and they'll give the Russians hell, those who came to Ukrainian soil. The link to donate is in the description of this video. And thank you so much for your help. Wishing us all a peaceful day. Glory to Ukraine,